My journey to this position and working in the sports industry, I like to say that uh, it's not the traditional route. I'm a former college football player, had aspirations of going to the league and having a professional career. Um, but upon finishing my senior season, um, attending the Senior Bowl and talking with the Canadian League Scouts, I was faced with that a decision of what does the next chapter look like? Do I chase the dream or would I pursue something else? And thankfully, at the time, I was already accepted into grad school. So I pursued that route to have a little more stability and security for my future. Um, so my first professional job after graduate school wasn't in sports at all. It was actually working in residence life in higher education. So I started my career off as a hall director. And in that position, I would have what was called a collateral, which is essentially another full-time position. And my role there was the coordinator for multicultural affairs. And it would be in that position that I would find my voice as a young professional of how do you speak truth to power? How do you advocate on disenfranchised and the most marginalized groups? How do you have conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion with those that may not be aware of the nuances of language, the importance of said conversations? How do you present it in a manner where individuals can enter into the conversation at their different vantage point, right? So when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I like to think of it as a continuum. That there are some that are more conscious and some that are in the process of waking up, right? In this the woke society that we live in. But where we are within that continuum can change depending on which element or aspect related to diversity that we're discussing. So how, when we're trying to do this work, how can I engage those who are already aware of the language, the nuances, and are already doing things? How can I also engage those who are in the middle of, I don't know what to say, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to do, I'm afraid to make mistakes. And then how do I engage those who are also completely unaware for whatever reason? I've never been exposed to this type of conversation. It doesn't make me feel comfortable, or I do not want to talk about this at all. When trying to do this work, it would be in that role as that coordinator where I would get my start. I would learn how to do this. So from there, it would be introducing new policies, creating intentional space for marginalized groups so we can thrive, so we can start to control your own narrative, so you can start to build and create and find those affirmations. And then I progressed throughout higher education for the next almost 10 years. And then December of 2020, I had an opportunity to step up in the big leagues and now enter into a recently created position doing diversity, equity, and inclusion for an NFL team. So my journey, it's almost like it doesn't matter where you start, but where you finish. Can you be consistent at your craft? What are you working towards? In every engagement, every involvement, every developmental opportunity, it was all building towards something. So you go from the coordinator, then you go to the assistant director. Then I took the leap from a small school to then working at a large Research One institution where I actually taught classes, serving as an adjunct professor on managing workplace diversity, in addition to building an office from scratch and then being asked to build another office from scratch, creating new policies, providing insight and counsel to whether it's human resources or the dean of the school, creating cultural competency trainings or cultural intelligence trainings for faculty and staff, creating intentional spaces for students to continue to grow, thrive, and develop and learn as well. And then having a chance to bring everything together, that kid who had the passion for playing sports, who had aspirations to make it to the league, combined now with that young professional who found their voice and found their purpose. You marry both of those into this role. And it's a roundabout way of how I got here. When I hear that question, there's a few things that come to mind. I think of um, how does that lesson or how does that question apply across industries? And I think one of the things that we need to realize is while we're focusing on representation in these different positions, we also should all give emphasis and spend time discussing what are the current, um, what's the current atmosphere of the place that we're talking about? Because while we can bring in more people who visibly look different, what are their experiences going to be like when they're here? Have we taken a pulse of the existing environment to find out what are the experiences of members who are part of the in group and are part of the out group? What are diverse experiences like at these different levels? So when we bring in new representation, it isn't the mindset of we're expecting you to now assimilate to this new culture. It's more of we're going to invest, we're going to continue to do everything we can to create diverse pipelines and increase representation, while at the same time, we're taking care of home and creating space for those individuals. So we'll do the things that need to be done in the process, whether it's pouring into more education around how do you manage people who look different than you? How do you manage people who identify different than you? Whether it's around addressing and making conscious the unconscious, right? So if we can take through a critical lens of how do we do things and why we do them, then now how can we plan for those who are coming in? And what I mean by that is, as we get more people who are pouring into the application pools, how can we get them then from the pools to then seeing them matriculate through the opening positions? You can have a diverse pool, but then what does the rest of the department or the rest of the office look like? What are we really trying to do? Is it just diversify the pools, or are we actually trying to get these people into the positions so we can continue to see the work grow and develop from there? So I think there's an importance of making a commitment and recognizing why we need to diversify within these different positions, but then also making sure that space is created where they can thrive, they can belong, and there are opportunities for them to continue to grow, to be celebrated, right? So there's one thing to be tolerated, and then there's another thing to be accepted and celebrated. When we see that there are individuals who come in who may bring diverse perspectives into the room or to the table, I think that creates an opportunity now where, again, we've given attention to our current culture and our current climate, and are actively taking steps where we're avoiding that assimilation. So I don't want you to come in and shut off those different pieces of your identity because you don't see yourself represented here. I want you to bring that because it's going to help you be the best you that you can be here. And then we're also going to create a space where we can have meaningful conversations where, individuals get to learn. And we'll provide opportunities to teach, as opposed to the onus being on members of the out group coming in and having to explain who they are, why they're here, or why they deserve to be in these different spaces. So some of the programs that we've already launched here is that we are willing to have the difficult conversations. We've had small group opportunities to engage in meaningful dialogue around race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. We're in the process of doing those things. We have committed to diversity scholarships and a celebration of an acknowledgement of Juneteenth as an organization. I think one of the biggest things that makes this possible, this whole conversation, is that they saw value in having a full-time person to take the lead and really do this work. So I'm blessed to be in this position and to have an opportunity to engage with the different stakeholders internally and externally on what does moving forward look like. How do we make sure that, when we're looking forward and we're trying to win the right way and do things the right way, that we're creating sustainable practices. that we're avoiding the performative works and really doing the things that can really make some real change. So I'm really proud of the commitments. I'm proud of how we're progressing. And I think one of the things that we'll see as time continues to go by is that the success of the individuals like myself who are in these roles, that we'll see more leagues, we'll see more teams invest in creating positions like this. One of the things that we've seen, I have a deeper appreciation for being on this side of the table. I think before, when I was just that fan looking, you do a lot of comparison of, well, this league's doing this and this league's doing this, and why aren't they doing this and this? And I think that also goes past sports, that you can look at other institutions, whether it's schools, whether it's businesses, why are they doing these things versus others? And why aren't other people doing these things? And what I see as an opportunity within the position that I hold is, how can I reach out across the industries? How can I see what's going on in those other leagues? And then how can I bring some of those best practices and try to implement them here? So being now on this side of the table, I also have an understanding of what's actually going on behind the scenes. New hires at the league level, new hires across the individual clubs. And we're starting to see that progress. We're starting to see some true commitments and some change happen. But I think it's going to vary by club. Everyone's going to have their different approach of how they do this work, what the responses look like. So I think the success of, again, the teams who have made the early investments of, if we either have councils or committees or actual professionals doing this work, then we'll see that take off. And then we'll continue to utilize best practices in the research and the opinions of the people who are here, right? What is your experience like? How can we do better? Where are those opportunities? So from our perspective, I think that that's something that we're focused on. How can we continue to do right by the people who are here? And then how can we continue to make space for those who are coming after us? Here's how we start to be proactive as opposed to being reactive. I think we're starting to see more people get in line with that of, how can we start to do this work? There's a lot of examples out there. We just got to start. I think it's very important to teach gender and racial equality to children. I mean, we're going to see difference. You see it. And if we aren't acknowledging, if we aren't providing those teachable moments early with children, then who will be, right? Who's filling in those moments when they have those questions, or where are they getting the resources and information to help them understand what's going on? One of the things that I've observed is that even children, the age of 4, they see difference. They see skin. They pick up on a lot. And as a father, these are conversations that we're having. When you have that moment and the child asks that question around something pertaining to either race or gender, how do you respond in that moment? How can you provide those teachable moments? I have a daughter. She says, "Hey, Daddy, are there any women that work at your job?" I said, "Yes, baby, there are." She's like, "Oh, I didn't know that. I thought football was for boys." And then in that moment, I have an opportunity to start to shift some of that thinking, right? Early intervention, early exposure can help them make sense of the world around them. So when we have those moments to have an impactful conversation, it can have a lasting impact. That was a lighthearted question, right? But then what happens then when we start to talk about other topics? There was something else that we discussed. How do you talk about bias to a 4-year-old? My daughter is not a fan of spicy food, and Dad can cook. So I made a meal. I said, "Hey, babe, this is what we have for dinner today." I said, "Dad, I don't like it." I said, "Well, how do you know you don't like it if you've never tried it? You've never had an experience with it." "I don't like it. It looks spicy." So then that was that moment that I had to now say how this is lighthearted. Say you have a bias against something that you've never experienced. While spicy food isn't going to be a polarizing topic, if we take change the context and flip that over to, well, I don't like this person, or I don't like these groups of people. Now I have that in to have some meaningful conversations around how can we move forward? How can we create these teachable moments so we can start to shift that narrative, so we can start to destigmatize some of these conversations, so we can create less taboo moments when talking about some of these topics. So I think early intervention, I think open and honest dialogue. There's a lot of resources out there that talk about how to have conversations around race with children because they see it. And I think, our comfort levels in those conversations can pattern behavior. I think it's vitally important to utilize the platform that you have, that there's a social responsibility that we all have. And, when we talk about sports, it can be that vehicle for change. It can be that opportunity to bring different groups of people together that wouldn't necessarily have opportunities to engage or have opportunities to interact. And, what we're seeing now with the nuances of technology, everybody has a platform. Everybody has an opinion about something. But in the words of the great philosopher, with great power comes great responsibility. Shout out to Spider-Man, right? And I think what we're seeing is that a lot of people, athletes or not, they have opinions about the things that they see. And in particular, as we focus on this conversation around athletes in sports, I think they have that platform to discuss a topic or an idea or a concept or an experience that many may not be exposed to. And that athlete speaking out about those things could potentially be the first time that you hear about this, first time that you're maybe forced to see it, right? That it's brought into your realm of consciousness. I think in those moments, it can be frustrating to many, but it also can be enlightening to many, that people could have those opportunities to dive deeper into something that they may have not heard before, or heard it presented in a manner where it clicks, or it makes them feel something, right? So you're going to be inspired, you're going to be frustrated, you're going to be upset, you're going to feel something. And I think that provokes thought. And what you do with that will entirely be up to the individual. But I think it creates a moment where we can have a shared experience, which is, us watching the games. But then now, because we have the attention brought to the situation or the topic, we also can feel some form of education, some form of exposure to a concept, and a call to action, right? And I think that message, that it'll land on different people in different ways based on where are you entering into the conversation. So kind of going back to that consciousness continuum of, depending on the topic or the aspect related to diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're discussing at the time, what's your level of comfort, or what's your level of exposure to this concept or this idea or this situation? Will you lean in, or will you say, hey, this isn't for me, I just want to watch sports. I don't want to focus on these things. And I think that happens at that individual level, that this, what they do, what they see, how they make sense of it. I think the response to it will change. It'll look different. But at the same time, it's forcing you to see something in that or not. Awareness. When shifting the needle, when trying to create truly equitable and inclusive spaces, that responsibility is not on the shoulders of one person. So whether that's your diversity officer, whether it's the diversity committee, I think to create sustainable change and really do this work, that it's going to take everybody. It's going to take those who already get it, who already know the language, who already been outspoken about it. It's going to take those who don't know what to do or where to start, that are hesitant. It's also going to take those who are completely disengaged, that there's room in the vehicle of change for everyone. And what moving forward looks like is going to involve all of us. So I think there's a measure of accountability, but how we get there is through education, it's through awareness, it's through the process of making the unconscious conscious. How do I know I should be doing something, or the benefits behind doing something, if it's never been exposed to me? If I've never been made aware of, here is the things that I should be doing or how I should do it. Now, I think generally there are a lot of good people in the world, and people who genuinely want to do right by other people. But there's also that element of the unconscious, the things that we do without knowing that we don't do it, the things that we do without knowing that we do them, or the things that we do that may impact someone else in a different light, right? So what are those triggers, or what are those moments where I have caused harm either intentionally or unintentionally? So there's this necessity behind creating a shared point of responsibility across the entire workplace, that moving the needle forward, creating sustainable change, that we all play a role in doing that. When I think of diversity, it's making sure that there's adequate representation across the board, in rooms where decisions are being made, that we are creating space for diverse perspectives to be shared. How can we minimize as much as possible an oversight or an overstep or an overthought, right? I think that in moments where the most well-intended people can still make mistakes, and with diversity being represented in the room, you have opportunities to engage people from different backgrounds, different experiences, to make sure that what we're doing is reflective, that we're conscious of the tone, that we're conscious of the messaging and delivery, that we're conscious of the why behind why we're doing what we're doing, why we're committing to these things. And then when I think of inclusion, I think of how has the space been intentionally made to support the people who are there? And then also, how is it made to support those who are coming? So instead of individuals who may need a little more support in whatever area, instead of that person having to out themselves and say, hey, I need this, how have we already thought of these things, or started a process where we can create trust, that we can create metrics or systems that allow people to share their experiences, so we can act on things now? That I don't want you as a supervisor to suffer in silence, or to feel as if that you can't share an experience that may be specific to you based on your identity or your beliefs, and that you don't feel like you're a part of what we're building here. So when I think of inclusion, is how can we make sure that those voices are heard, that people know that they matter and that they belong. So ultimately, I think for those who are trying to commit to doing this work, it's important to realize that it's not about where you start, but where you finish. What are you striving to accomplish, whether it's at the personal level or as an organization? And how can you make sure that those steps, those choices, those decisions, those actions, how can you make sure they come from a good place, that they reflect a diverse representation, as well as how do you make them sustainable?